Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Dutch Mentor at our Monday morning chat, promptly at 10 o'clock, especially if there's no electronic or digital difficulties as we experienced this morning. Quick, but we are resilient, we overcame, and I'm glad I'm here today with Dan Kowalski, and we're going to have a great conversation about something that is very interesting that caught my eye several months ago. His, tagline: deliberate thinking. We know as leaders we have to activate our thinking skills often. That is really a combination of asking really good questions, really intently listening, and then putting it all together to be able to provide a vision and have a good conversation with our team members to lead through context to solve complex problems. So I then on my in my class in the academy a couple 3 4 weeks ago with the students, and we really had an engaging conversation, and I personally learned a lot. So I would like to welcome Dan. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the public, and we'll get the show on the road. And again, thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, thank you. I really am happy to be here. Hello to everyone. I would say good morning, but I know we have people all over the world, so I'll say hello, and I'll introduce myself fairly quickly. I specialize in asking questions, so it's quite unusual for me to be on the other side of it, and Walter will ask me some questions, and I'll say some things. And how that came to be is I trained as an environmental engineer, and I was an expert in treating industrial wastewater. And then 4 years into my career, all the regulations that I was required to meet, or my industry, I was in the paper industry, which required to meet, were changed. I was told that what I did was no longer needed, and I needed to reinvent myself as a process engineer. Now, I don't know if you know much about process engineering. It takes a lot of chemical engineering. I didn't have that much. They were optimistic about my ability to do that, but it didn't turn out that way. But what I was really good at doing when I went into a production facility was helping the process engineers, mostly chemical engineers, be better thinkers, because I tended to ask questions that they didn't think to ask. And that stopped their normal or usual thinking. And since then, I have specialized in helping people move beyond the obvious and start thinking harder about the issues. And if I may say, it's not hard to do the thinking. It's more about better thinking and thinking of it from a different angle. And most of the time, the way to do that is you have to disrupt what your current thinking is. We're really, really good at using typical solutions. And in fact, the more I read on the topic, we don't actually think that much, even when we believe we're thinking. What we're doing is we're quickly assessing situations, understanding how similar are they to something else we have done, and bam, we do it. And Daniel Kahneman, behavioral economist with a Nobel Prize in that area, kind of identified with his thinking partner, a guy named Amos Tversky, who unfortunately passed away before he could also share in the Nobel. They figured out that we don't have two brains, but we have two ways of thinking. And one is system one, it's automatic, and system two is more deliberate. System one is great. It keeps us alive. The best example, and I use it all the time because we all can relate to it. When we're driving in our car, we see the brake lights go on in the car in front of us. The research shows we are hitting the brakes before we're even aware we're hitting the brakes. And that's good because 99 times out of 100, hitting our brakes is the right answer. It keeps us out of an accident. But how many things are like that in the world of business? Not as many. COVID, certainly, no one had prior experience with that. The last pandemic was over 100 years ago. So we had to think differently. And some companies did it better than others. So I thought what I would do, and Walter mentioned this, I thought I would share with you some of the questions that I think everyone should always be at least willing to ask, if not asking. So the first question I would always ask is, how might I be wrong? And there's where you want to listen and not prepare your defense for why you're not wrong. You want to really, really listen. A friend of mine a long time ago, he said to me, you know, Dan, we have been blessed with 2 ears and 1 mouth. We ought to use them in that same proportion. And that's important. So how might I be wrong? And the variation on that would be what would have to be true for the opposite opinion that I'm holding to happen. And all of that forces you to think beyond the obvious that you were going to do. So I just read in the Wall Street Journal, and it's actually hitting lots of different news feeds. Many companies have figured out, oh my gosh, we're having too many meetings. So they've declared that Fridays are no meeting day, or maybe even Monday. Well, that's interesting and helpful potentially. My question is asking, why are you having so darn many meetings? Why isn't anybody asking that question? Because honestly, and we are meeting way too often. And in the old days, pre-COVID, you couldn't meet as often because A, there was travel involved, or there weren't enough meeting rooms in your building. And now, what are we doing? With Zoom and other platforms, we have unlimited availability for meeting. I personally work for myself, so I have a lot of external clients, and I'll get pinged. It's like, meet now. Really? Why? Tell me more about that. I want to ask more questions. So how might I be wrong, or what would have to be true for the opposite to work? Those are two really good questions that will stop your thinking and get other people thinking differently. So
So
that
on
those,
that note, yeah. So on that note, before we go on to the next one, is it then is I so interesting. We had Mike Paperno come and join our class last week and talk about communication. But the most important about piece of communication is listening. And I tend to be pretty poor listeners. We miss out really vital components for the simple fact is that as we listen, we tend to already process the information and prepare a response while the person is still laying out the story. You've seen that too, that people, and again, it goes back to making assumptions rather than deliberately thinking about the problem from different angles. Why is that, right? What is the best way to counter that? And what do you have an exercise in mind where people can, practice listening skills to really understand, seek to understand before responding?
yeah, I have two things I would say. So we often have two modes of listening. One is listening to learn, and the other is listening to respond. And I think what you want to really be thinking about is, I want to learn. And one of the things that I do is I take extensive notes when I'm listening to someone. And I don't take them verbatim. Sometimes, if they say something really cool, I will try to get that one exact. But I take those notes because the mere fact that I am now engaging my hand along with my brain to capture information, it leaves less room for me to be thinking up what my response might be. And I find that that's very useful. Then I can look at that and I can paraphrase back. And did I understand this right? You said this, and that shows that I'm listening more. So those are the things that I do. There are some people that are into the areas of neurolinguistic programming that say that if you mirror what the speaker is doing, that will also help you listen better. So there's this idea of whether a story gets you to lean in or whether it causes you to lean back. And if they're doing that and you do that, you're going to be more synchronized with how they're speaking. But it's work. It's hard work to be a good listener. But here's the thing that I would want your viewers to learn from this. The person who has the most power in a conversation is the listener. Because the listener can actually get up and walk away. And the speaker is forced, if they want to keep the conversation going, to go with them. The listener has the power, but the only way you have that power is when you're the listener. So stay in listening mode. I think Yogi Berra, the Yankee guy, I think he has famous quotes, and I think one of them was, oh no, it wasn't you can learn a lot by listening. It was you can see a lot by watching. But I think the same thing happens with listening is you can hear a lot while listening. And I know that in my case, I try real hard. It's a lot of work. And there are times when I didn't follow. Sound was hitting my eardrums. I was aware of words being spoken. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I missed what you just said. Would you please repeat it?
Yeah,
And you can be that honest with people. I think it helps.
yeah. I think it is the word being mindfully present.
Hmm.
And I think that is one of the things that as leaders we need to do and practice often is that when you are spending time with your team, that you really have to be mindfully listening so you can the person who is speaking actually feels and sense that you are present in the moment, that you are reducing or taking all of the distractions away, including maybe leaving your cell phone in your office when you go out on the gamba and spend time with folks, right? It is the time that you can absorb the information, process the information, analyze the information, and only at the right time that you can then put a response together that you can show that you actually listened deeply to what was being said. In medicine, we rely a lot about feedback and verify. That is when you do verbal orders, or a technique that I was taught a long time ago is called ask, tell, ask, and that is literally going ask the person, what did you just hear me say? What is it that you understood? And that really does two things, right? Is A is making sure that the person actually heard what I tried to convey, and did they understand the language that I spoke? Now let's go back to to deliberate thinking. So asking really good questions is a part of excelling in communications. So in healthcare, we have engaged ourselves in Lean, Six Sigma, and other types of process improvement methodologies. What is the real value of bringing an outsider into a group of people who are trying to solve a complex problem?
Oh, that's a great question. And the value of the outsider is that they have no preconceived notions. They're going to ask the question that um, might sound dumb, but they're trying to learn. And sometimes by asking that question, it gets everyone else thinking a little bit differently because we do get stuck. I had an experience with a client team a couple of years back now, cross functional, starting up a new food factory in India. And when you start up a new factory, you don't want all the equipment to come up at once. That would be crazy and chaotic. So when one piece comes up, you test it and see if it runs. In this particular case, second to the last piece of equipment was what was available to be tested first. And that was the piece that made finished product. The last step was putting it into packaging. So they had none of the input materials. And one of the technical experts said, I know what we can do. I know how we can get the materials. We're going to rent time on the supplier's factory pilot plant here in the United States, buy special containers, air freight to India, and pay the tariff, and we'll run it. And that was an answer. And it was a good answer, except it was going to cost $800,000 and take 6 weeks. So I asked the question, how can we get this material? Not how can we make this material? I don't know anything about making food. And they said, well, it has to be food safe. I said, yes, but there's a lot of food factories in India. Oh, yeah, that's an idea. We should call around. So because of the time zone difference, they made some phone calls and emails. And lo and behold, the next day, we found a material. Or they found a material. That's they come in and we're all excited. We found it. We found it. I said, great. And here's the great news: $800,000? No way. $50,000 in 1 week, not six. I said, well, that's fantastic. And they said, you know what's really amazing? We make it. It's one of our factories. They had never thought of it that way. This factory made sweet things, and they didn't think about putting that into the savory product, but they were not going to eat it, taste it, or try to sell it. So it didn't matter. It was the physical properties. So because I didn't know anything better, I asked the question, how can we get it? Not how can we make it? One word changes everything. So the outsiders bring those questions that they wouldn't have thought to ask.
Yeah, interesting. So let's take that now inside of a facility. Obviously, leaders, and I hope that most of them will be spending quality time going on the gambit to go where the work is done, are often faced with questions of and solving problems, and at times very complex problems. But I also feel there's often a preconceived notion that the leader should have all the answers. So instead of being able to provide the answers, what is it that you would suggest the leader does and ask? So when somebody brings a problem to them, instead of responding or reacting to that with a solution in mind, what questions could they ask? And you started the conversation earlier about why. How can they put a proposition and question back to their team that instigates, more deliberate thinking and potentially, solutions that make sense?
Yeah, so a couple things. First off, E. E. Cummings has a quote that I think is fantastic, and it's always the beautiful answer who asks a more beautiful question. So I think that leaders, and everyone is a leader, in my opinion, in their own way. If they're helping other people get things done, they're leading, even if they don't have the title. So what questions you want to ask, the more beautiful question is, what have you thought about so far? And just asking them what they've thought about will have you understand how deliberate or non-deliberate they've been. And they might, for example, they might say, well, when we have this problem, we always do this, 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 and this. And we've tried all of those and those don't work. Great. All right. So they're trying to use the usual thinking. That's a good thing to do, but it's not working. Now, all right. So what's different about this current issue that our old solutions aren't working? We need to understand it more. And that's when you want to open up that dialogue and see what they have to say. And there may be some experience that the leader has that they're not aware of. Maybe they've come from another facility and have seen something that these people hadn't seen. But it's really, I want to understand what thinking they've done so far, and then what's the limitations and shortcomings within that.
Yeah, it's really good. So I promote pragmatic thinking as it comes down to using an A3 thinking versus a Lean Six Sigma model. And in A3 thinking, you really, we try to get the team to understand what is the problem, right, and really focus and scope. So you really have an opportunity to go an inch wide, a mile deep, and not try to boil the ocean. They have to establish that current state. What does it look like today? Without coming with any solutions. And that is really a real struggle. People love to talk about solutions, but they have a harder time really understanding what does it look like today. And then, of course, the third step is about setting a target. What's the vision? What is the end goal that you have in mind? And the fourth step is the root cause analysis. And this is where I find the biggest pickle, is that people don't really understand or appreciate the need to do a root cause analysis. It's almost like iceberg, right? People love to spend time on the tip of the iceberg that you can see above the water level, but there's so much more to explore. How can deliberate thinking and asking good questions help the team through the brainstorming process of looking for and having discussions around opportunities?
Oh, that's an excellent question, and one that has a lot of parts to it. I'll try to unpack it as much as I can, and then you can ask me some other questions if I haven't unpacked it enough. So, when we have problems, usually that means we're not getting something done at work, whether it's the computer, the network is down, or a communication line is down, or a piece of equipment that's vital to something that we need to do isn't running. And our first priority most of the time is get it fixed. And by fixed, I probably should say, get it running again. And when that happens, we tend to do a lot of trial fixes. And then what happens is the last thing that we do something and then it worked. It's like, okay, that's it. Don't touch anything else. And then it gets written up in a book. I used to work in the paper industry, and this is before databases, but now I've talked to my friends that are still there and they have databases. But it used to be a big logbook. To all who shall read, when this problem happens, do this. And what you have are a lot of solutions, none of which will solve the problem, but keep the problem from you getting the work done. So I think what happens is people are fixated on getting things running again, not necessarily understanding why it broke. So, and I'm all for that. I mean, you got to keep, you can't shut down the hospital while you're trying to find root cause. You got to keep it running. But then I think what has to happen is after action review, and that's where you then dig in deeper and say, all right, what caused the cause? In the world of problem solving, I'm familiar with A3. There are a lot of different things. There's a couple of key questions you want to ask. Do we have a deviation? That's that target versus actual. And then is cause unknown? And do we need to know cause to take corrective action? And that's what we're looking at doing is we may not need to know cause to take corrective action right now, but we will later. So if you're getting the blue screen of death, if you're using a Windows machine, Control Alt Delete will fix that. But if it keeps happening, something's wrong on your hard drive or malware, something, you got to get to the root of that. You can only do that so much. So I think that's the key thing, is to understand, do I need root cause right now? And sometimes you do, but many times you don't, but you eventually will, and you can't just keep sweeping that under the rug. So that's what I
So
think.
yeah, very very good. It's funny. It makes me actually think of an incident, multiple incidents. So we were guided by senseis from Japan with deep experience around process improvement, and we have done many 3P events where you actually model the new process that is developed after you take the appropriate steps, right? The analysis prior to looking for root causes, or even design for the future. And we would put hours and hours of labor time into coming up with solutions and 3D models on what the future could look like. And after we were all done, he would literally come at times and just take his whole arm and just throw it to the floor. He says, "I know you can do better." And that really leads to the thought process behind it, is that frequently our first thought, our first solution is not the best solution. So
Mhm.
once people come up with a solution, what is it that we should be asking as a challenge question to make sure that we really did get to the root cause, or did we really design or come up with the best solution for the problem that's at hand?
Oh, wow. Walter, you asked, I thought I asked tough questions, but you asked some really good ones. So the first thing I want to comment on is what you said initially around the sensei coming and knocking, I know you can do better. Um, in the field of innovation, there are a lot of people that say you should burn your first idea. And literally, sometimes they'll take a match because it's paper, they just burn it up and say, okay, that's it. Otherwise, it's crumple it up and throw it into the trash. And so in many cases, that's correct, especially when you're trying to innovate. Sometimes, though, if you've got a known problem area for which there are probably some good and mostly correct answers, I'm not sure I would throw away my first idea. But what I would do is I'd want to do a trial fix or some sort of verification, because many times we can get a problem to disappear, but that doesn't necessarily mean we've solved it. And I think that that's the key, is ideally, if you can make the problem come and go at will, then you know you've actually found the root cause. And that's that a lot of gemba is needed for that. You've got to really go out and do things, and you may have to design some experiments to really validate that. Now, you should only do that when it's not going to be expensive or otherwise deadly. But in many cases, a lot of times you can do a trial. I know, like in the IT world, they'll have their separate system and they'll say, oh, let's just try it over there and see if it works. So that's a really good technique. But it's
Yeah,
hard. It's hard to have that discipline.
yeah. So yeah, piloting is definitely something that we will have to bring up in a future conversation on our Monday morning chat, because there we can go to talk about for hours, right? What can go right and what can go wrong. Well, listen, it's 10:24. This is almost too easy. We could probably talk for another hour or two, but we all know that the attention span of deliberately thinking and being in the present is about 20 minutes. So I would like to wrap up the conversation, but I think that it really is a great segue. As we talked about deliberate thinking, a lot of it has to do with our behavior. And actually, next week's guest is a good mentor of mine, Mike Versina, who has written books and has been, is a standout in the industry around neuroscience and how we can really focus on our behavioral capacity. And I think it's a great segue from our conversation today to next week, because it is, performance equals the function of two things: technical skills, like asking good questions, and our behavior. And only once we really understand those two functions and we execute them appropriately, can we really become a high performance team. So to end the show, why don't you give us your parting thoughts, something that people can anchor or hang on to, and let's see what else we have.
Well, I would say, I asked the question, how might I be wrong, as a good thing to practice asking. The second thing I would say is, when you are wrong, say, I was wrong, period. Most of us say, I was wrong, but, and then we proceed to explain why we are not wrong. Practice being wrong. You'll get better. You'll learn more. It's how we learn to talk, how we learn to walk, how we do many things is by failure. So if you don't fail, you won't learn. So I was wrong, period. Try that.
Very, very, very powerful. Thank you for sharing that knowledge. Then, same as the last couple of times we met, phenomenal. I really enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to having you back on the show in the future to talk about another topic, because I'm sure that we can cover a few more that can add value to emerging leaders in any of the industries that we cover. So again, thank you everybody for joining our show at the Dutch Mentor Monday morning chat at 10 a.m. Again, next week we'll have Mike Versina come on at 10 o'clock to talk a little bit about how he looks at the world of leadership and the importance of understanding our own behaviors as well as the behaviors of those that we lead. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Take good care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.